Good afternoon. This is Rabbi Sachs. Welcome back to the Chai Academy. We are, we have, we have been studying, beginning yesterday, the Maimonides' take on God. Maimonides' discussion of what is it that we believe about God. And as we said yesterday, Maimonides doesn't necessarily use the term belief. Maimonides says that we have to really understand, we have to know, we have to delve, we have to research, etc., etc. Hey, Eileen, good afternoon. So, as a recap from yesterday, very very briefly, Maimonides says that God is the first and only existence, and God is the primary being. Right? And if God wouldn't exist, there'd be no world. There could be no world and still have a God, but if you don't have a God, you can't have a world, you can't have anything. When we say world, we're talking about world and all its ramifications, including galaxies and universes, etc., etc. My money says to know God is one of the biblical mitzvahs, and to deny God is also a biblical no-no. And he explains yesterday that denial of God is not that you just deny God. No, I'm an atheist. He says that, yeah, that is a denial of God. He says, but that's not only it. If somebody if somebody believes that God created the world, or God is the creator, but then God moved on to create other things, that too, Maimonides said, is considered a non-believer. Likewise, if somebody says that God created something that is now autonomous and is no longer under God's minute to minute, moment to moment jurisdiction, that's also. So God, everything in the Kabbalah, it talks about that even blades of grass have a godly influence. Even a stone, even the moss on a stone has a godly influence. But that's not, Maimonides is talking, Maimonides doesn't talk about that per se. I mean, he does say that everything is created by God, everything. And it's one God, and there's not a dualism. It's one God, and not a composite of different attributes coming together. And God did not just create the world and leave. God didn't give the authority for the Son to rule the world while God is somewhere in the spiritual Caribbean. But rather, God is involved. God is part and parcel of this world. God has no body. God has no form. God has no beginning, no end. God doesn't stand or sit, right? And there's no anthropomorphic term. No, God has no anthropomorphism. What he does have is that when we talk about God, we can say God said, God saw, God this, God that, but that's just us. We can't say that God has an iris and God has lips and teeth and mouth and larynx and throat and uvula. Nothing like that. No, there's no age with God. God didn't. There's no period that existed. There was no God, and then God came into being. Right? You think about it, that you know, and there's no death. God is not going to end. God has no end. There's no limit, etc. God doesn't have human emotions like we have, right? God doesn't. God doesn't have anger. God doesn't have anything like that. Let's just focus in for a moment. So God always existed. God exists, and God will always exist. Right. And just to delve into that a little, hold on to your hat. So God is a continuum, a constant, right? But even the words past, present, and future don't apply to God. Time is a creation made by God. The fact that we have something called time, it's just, and things get older and things progress and etc., and get older, wiser, etc. It doesn't apply to God. It just doesn't. Time is you know, time is made up. So when they say that God always existed, essentially for God, every moment is the same moment. There's no past, present, and future. You know, and that applies. We see it in our lives. I mean, we celebrate Passover. For one reason, we celebrate Passover is because Passover happened. God took the Israelites out of Egypt, and therefore we commemorate it every year. But it's also, from God's perspective, the Exodus is happening right now. Because God doesn't have a past, present, and future. So that's you know, but that is a little, you know, a little abstract. It's right. It's not so comfortable for the ear to hear such a thing. The Maimonides, that was chapter 1 essentially. Now Maimonides goes into chapter 2, and it says that you're obligated. So in chapter 1, he gave 2 mitzvahs. You're obligated to know God and believe in God, and you're not allowed to deny God in any way, shape, or form. You can't even say that God is 99%, you know, and then 1% is given to you know, something else. You can't even say that. God is 100% present, there, real, etc. So those are the two mitzvahs. He begins by saying that there's another 2 mitzvahs that we'll study in this chapter, and that is that it's a biblical obligation to love God. And it's a biblical obligation to fear God. Now, there's levels of love and there's levels of fear. So one level of love would be, I love you, or I'm going to be, you know, I love you for the reward that I'm going to get. You know, just like you know, it's you do the mitzvahs and etc. Thank you, Zeph. So you do the you do a mitzvah in anticipation of reward. That's one level of connecting with God and loving God. And the other level is that you just love. It's a thirst. It's a love. And it's a, and you know, infatuation, we have to be careful of that word because infatuation is not long lasting. But you simply thirst to be close to God. But not in an infatuation type of way, but because it's temporary, but a permanent or a ongoing love of God. Likewise, fear, right? There's fear of God, where you're afraid that you're going to get a smack. You're afraid that you're going to go to hell, which we can discuss that later time, what Judaism thinks of that. And we haven't had a class on that yet, I believe. You know, or you stand in awe of God. So that there's levels, right? Levels of love, levels, but whatever level, even the basic level, I love God, and I'm gonna do what God asks, is incredible. Even if it's not a thirst, even if it's not a desire to connect, but just on a very, very low level. And even fear, if you just fear God because you fear punishment, you just love God because of reward, that's also a level. That fulfills the obligation, but that shouldn't be your end all. Your end all should be to love God for the right reasons and fear God for the right reasons, because you're just gobsmacked. You ever heard that word? Your jaw drops at the awesomeness, and you have awe of God. Trepidation is one level, awe is another. So he says, so how do we get to love and awe God? How do we get to that level, even on a very basic level? So he says that can only come if one thinks about it. If one goes through life and doesn't think about the awesomeness of God, what God does, what God is all about, and you just go through life on autopilot, he says you'll never be able to get to that level. And in essence, I think that's true of many things. Take marriage. If your marriage is on autopilot, you'll never get to the bond. You'll never get to that bond of two people, loving each other and respect it. If you just if you're married and you go through autopilot year after year after year after year, you're not going to have the bond. What do you have to do? You have to invest time, thought. You have to cogitate. You have to say, okay, how can I make this marriage better? What did I do wrong, etc. You cannot be just on autopilot. So likewise, when it comes to God, one needs to really spend time. And it's interesting in the book of Tanya, which is I talk about a lot, right? It says that the correct time to do it is either before prayer, in the morning, before prayer, get up a half hour early and think and contemplate, or midnight, tikkun chatzos, get up at midnight, sit on the floor and with a cup of Persian tea, and think about God, and then go back to bed. But in other words, dedicate time. So he says. So let's go into what did God do. So he says, so we know that God is the creator, right? That God created everything, and God created it from nothing. It did not exist before. There was no form, there was no matter, there was no chemicals. That God just said, okay, you go here, you mix with here. That did not happen. There was nothing. There was nothingness. And it's interesting, the absence of light is not dark. When we say that God formed light, so that means it was dark before? No. There was nothing before. Darkness is also a creation, right? It's not just the absence of light. So what did God create? So this is Maimonides' take on God's creative juices, so to speak. So he says that everything that God created can be divided into three categories. The first category is a creation that has a matter and form. So matter would be, for example, the body, and form would be the soul. So the body's the matter, and the form is the soul. And he says now that type of creation, they come into existence, and then they cease to exist. So that would be, for example, human beings, animals, beasts, plants, right? Even metals. Metals can rot into nothing, right? Even metals. So they have matter, and they also have something that's within the matter called form. So they come into existence, and they do not. Then they go out of existence. Now it's interesting, when he says soul, he does not mean necessarily the neshama. When he says soul, he means the animating force that's within the person, within the beast, within the plant, or within the metal. Because a soul, as in the neshama, a soul is eternal. Right? A soul is eternal. A soul is a part of God, and therefore does not cease to exist. So when he's talking about here the word form, he's not talking about the soul that we call neshama, but rather the soul, the energy, what animates us. It's very clear. It's very clear. If you've ever seen a cadaver, I don't wish it on you, unless you're a mortician, that's your job. But if you ever seen a cadaver, it's clear that there's something missing. There's something missing, right? I mean, it's the same, the person and all the eyes, ears, nose, etc. But no one's home. What is that? So that's the soul. That's the form. In addition, they have a conscience. A conscience is the ability to connect to God and etc. And human beings have the most developed neshama, most developed sensitivity and consciousness of existence. The second thing God created, it's also a combination of matter and form, right? But do not change from body to body, right, form to form, but rather it's more of a permanent fixture. And he gives examples. So he says the stars, the severes, the galgalim. Galgalim could be translated as the zodiacs, could be translated as the planets. It could be translated as something more ethereal than that even. So he says that the matter perhaps differs, but he says the matter they have is different than the matter in the first category, and the form they have is different from the form in the first category. So the second creation is more of a permanent fixture, like the moon, like a star, right? Like Pluto, right? I don't know if this is ever established what Pluto is, but is it a planet? I'm not sure. But I'm not sure what the bottom line was. But I used to know. So that's a second type of creation. And he says on the third type of creation that God created, they have form but no matter. He says, I'll give you an example. He said angels, right? The angels, they don't possess bodies, right? They're not considered a corporeal being. They're not physical, material, corporeal, etc. But they are, because they're different, one angel from another, they must have form. Because if they didn't have form and they don't have matter, there's really no way to differentiate. So he goes, they must have form. And he said, and he points out something which I think is to anybody who loves sci-fi. He says, and to all these people, they talk about angels with wings and right, or angel of fire, and so it seems like they do have some type of matter to them, etc. He says it's all metaphors. He says it's all metaphors. An angel has form but no matter, and by the way, here's an interesting part: as angels versus human beings. If you were to put angels on a scale and put human beings on the other side of the scale, angels don't matter. They have no matter and they don't matter. A human being with a neshama is much loftier than an angel that doesn't have a neshama, right? Because the difference between one cardinal difference between a human being and an angel is the human being has free will. An angel cannot negate God's will. A human being can totally trample all over it. Right? A human being, could completely take God's will and say, you know what, I'm not doing it. Right? God's will is don't kill, right? And don't murder, etc., etc. And you're allowed to defend yourself, but you can't, in murder, if someone tries to hurt you, you can. But to develop like an atom bomb and use it is not, it's. I mean, I guess would God approve of the? I don't know. But to put forth a coronavirus is trespassing God's will. If it was done willingly and if it was done maliciously, that is a perfect example of somebody taking, God doesn't want you to do it, and you do it anyway. Right? So that an angel can't do that. An angel is almost like bound and gagged, and you say what I say, otherwise you get a shock, your neck collar. So an angel cannot, and it's even more than an angel really can't, even if it wants to. Right. So then Maimonides asks, right? So he says, okay, so they don't possess a body, but they're a form. So what is the difference of from them one to the other? How do they differ? Right? God doesn't create redundancy. So if you create different types of angels, right? How? Yeah, like a puppet. Um, it's so how God doesn't create redundancy, so therefore there's different types of angels, but and there's different levels of angels. But how do you differentiate angels? How do you differentiate from one or the other? So he says, okay. So first of all, no matter what level angel it is, just like the world and all therein, angels also come from God. Its energy comes from directly from God, just like our um, the world's existence comes from God. Right? So so it says, however, it says there are angels that are loftier one than the other. So there's degrees of angels, and these degrees are in the energy they receive from God. And it was explained to me as follows: that there's in a person you have intellect and you have emotion, right? So and now they're both qualities. They're both qualities within the person, right? They're both qualities within the person, but intellect is considered above emotion, right? So why? Because emotion is more self-oriented, where where intellect, um, it's just levels um, of knowledge of how much you know, so even in oneself you have these two spiritual things, intellect and emotions. One's higher, one's lower. So likewise with the angels, they have higher levels of grasping godliness because God created them so. And he does say here that when you speak about two sages, one is greater than the other. So it says they are. What does it mean greater than the other? It says it's one is above the other. One is more knowledgeable, scholarly, connected. One has a better understanding of God. So likewise with the angels, excuse me, the angels, they also, the higher and lower doesn't mean where they stand in the realms of heaven. It's not a spatial thing. It's to do with levels of connectedness to God, and that is given how much God gives them. So how much they receive is how lofty they are. Maimonides says that there are 10 levels of angels. So the first one is called the Holy Chayot. Chayot are the first level. They're the first level of angel. Once again, even they don't have free will, but they are the first level of angel, and they're extremely connected to God. And then there's the Ophanim, etc., etc. It's interesting that the colloquial one that we say angel is Malach, right? So that is number 6 on the totem pole. So if Chayot is the first, Malach is second. But Maimonides clarifies further. That's just a colloquial expression. We call it Malach. Malach means messenger. He says the angels that do converse with human beings, for example, when someone has a prophecy, and the angel is giving the person the prophecy, he says that is the level called Ishim. Ish is a human. Ishim is the angel that converses with the human. So when a person has a prophecy, a person has a inspiring moment where they were given insight, right? It was once told to me as follows, that if a person has a math problem, for example, and they sleep on it, and in the morning they get up and they figured out this math problem, never happened to me, by the way, he says, what happened? Right? What's his term? Sleep on it. What happens? He says, so you are given, assisted by this level of ishim to help you get through a certain problem. Right? Now, are there loftier levels of people, like someone like Moses, who doesn't tap into ishim but taps into something else? Of course. Of course. So Moses would probably, Moses, when he went to get the Holy Torah, Moses kind of stepped over even the chayos. Moses, he said, "Oh, excuse me." So he goes, "I'm a chayot." So Moses says, "Oh, whatever," and he ascended from there. But to a regular prophet, and there's not that many prophets these days, much to my chagrin. There's a lot of not-for-profits, so I gotta wait in line. But not me. The Chai Center's got to wait in line. But the idea is that there are 10 levels, and the highest level is you have more of a connection with God. You're spiritually more in tune. You have more energy. You have more power. And he says here that Chayot gives some of their connection and energy to Ophanim. Ophanim mentor the next level, right? And the Keruvim mentor the Ishim. So he says that it's a downward spiral. In general, when the Kabbalah talks about the creation of the world, it does talk about there's this cosmic evolution. And these are the type of things that it means, is that one gives to the other on a little bit lower, a little bit of a lesser degree, a lesser energy, a little bit more dense, a little bit more in code, until you finally get down to this world. So Ishim are way more connected to humans than they are to the Chayot. And that's why they're called Ishim. It's almost like, their level is close to the level of human knowledge. Right? He says, however, an angel, they know exactly where their bread is buttered. Right? So their knowledge is above a human, about God. And their knowledge is above human, but they know exactly the scoop. They have a tremendous, immense knowledge. They understand God's greatness. They understand of creation from nothing, ex nihilo into something. They get it. He says, but having said that, the level of Chayot, which is the loftiest level of angels, still their knowledge is nothing. Their knowledge of God is still nothing compared to the source itself. Right? Because even an angel endowed with tremendous spiritual qualities and energy, effluence, etc., is still not able to grasp God in its entirety. It does grasp God in the level above, more so than the level below it. So it's a level above, so that means it gets more. And he says, and even the lowest level gets it, does get it, right? And it knows and understands the Creator in a manner that totally surpasses the potential of human beings to understand. So we're not finished chapter 2. I guess we'll have to finish it tomorrow. But the idea is that, so there's three creations. One that comes and goes. The other one that comes and doesn't really go. I mean, the question is, there are stars that do go, right? But it takes an incredible amount of time. By the way, if you're ever in Flagstaff, Arizona, this is just a PSA. They have an unbelievable because, first of all, because the light pollution is kept to a minimum there, but they have unbelievable telescopes that you can actually see the sun. You can see stars in the process of death. And it shows you can see Orion. It's a really amazing. And the Milky Way is just like, it's like walking down the street. You can see the Milky Way. But yeah, but stars do, but it's not like a human being. It's not like a planet. It's not like, we live 100 years. A star can live many lifetimes, and still be shining as bright as ever. So that's the second one. But to say it never ceases to exist, it's not accurate, because we know for sure that a star does cease to exist. And then, of course, there's the third one that has no matter, only form, and the form is distinguished by their level of intelligence, right? Intelligence and comprehension of God. Are there any questions? Now's a great time. Tomorrow we're going to stay. Maimonides moves away from angels and goes somewhat into God Himself, about what God's knowledge, etc. So that will be tomorrow. Also a very fascinating Maimonides. You can always send me a question, by the way, rabbi@thechaicenter.com. If you want to see more of these types of classes, there's many of them. thechaicenter.com/academy. God bless. Welcome, Zev.